Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In the next 4 episodes, we're going to be talking about access to digital scholarly content, to be more specific. There's an initiative underway called Seamless Access that can be described as very simple in concept but difficult in execution. Let me explain why. Seamless Access, which you can learn more about at seamlessaccess.org, is a coalition-backed standard for digital authentication that enables a single sign-on. That's it. And yet this process has been a long-standing problem for researchers who simply want to log into a publishing platform, whether on campus or off, and locate a journal article or other piece of digital scholarly content that's included in their institution's subscription package. The usual IP-based access a researcher has via their institution has been working less well, especially as a single sign-on, and the problem has become so acute that it's causing a critical mass of researchers to bypass that process altogether and locate the content they need on a freely available site, whether legally or illegally. It's a frustrating user experience for researchers, and it's an alarming development for publishers and institutions who are seeing a decline in usage of some very expensive content. Seamless Access emerged from the guidelines established by the RA21 initiative, and joining me to talk about how it works are Heather Flanagan, Program Director at seamlessaccess.org, and Laird Barrett, Digital Product Manager at Springer Nature, which was one of the first publishers to implement the Seamless Access service. In this first episode of our 4-part series, brought to you by Springer Nature, Heather and Laird explain what Seamless Access is, the technology supporting it, and why, from their perspective, it's necessary. All right, Heather and Laird, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So why don't we start with a pretty easy question, I think, for both of you. What is Seamless Access? And why don't we talk about it from both the sort of technology and platform perspective, as well as sort of the organization and governance behind it.
Do you want to take that one, Heather?
Sure. Well, Seamless Access, it's a service designed to help foster more streamlined access experiences when accessing scholarly collaboration tools or information resources or shared research infrastructure, really things specifically in the realm of authentication and authorization.
Mm-hmm.
The direction for the service and the implementation came out of the RA21 initiative, which finished last June. That was a joint project between the International Association of STM Publishers and the National Information Standards Organization, NISO.
Mm-hmm.
And while the origin was definitely in the scholarly publishing and library communities, we're really working hard on proving out the applicability of Seamless Access for all parties that want to use federated identity as part of their authentication and authorization workflows. So right now we're in a beta service because we're still testing out the ideals of RA21. We came up with best practices. That's great. Do they actually work?
Yep.
We'd love to find out. So that's where we are now.
Okay. So safe to say that the same organizations behind RA21 are behind Seamless Access still, or sort of what was the evolution from one to the
More.
other?
There's definitely more than
Okay.
there were. RA21 was very, very much in the STM publisher arena with some library organizations participating. Now we have strong participation from R&E identity federations or federation consortia.
Mm-hmm.
Internet 2 is probably the largest national research and education network in the U.S., and they are seated on the governance board, as well as GÉANT, which is a consortia of NRENs in Europe.
Okay. So if I get it correctly, so the back in June, sort of the development of RA21 was sort of the idea behind it was coming up with I guess guidelines and proposals, and now we're moving into more of a implementation phase. Yeah.
That's a good way to capture it.
Okay. So I'm curious, Heather, you in terms of the potential user community, you talked a little bit about how RA21 and Seamless Access are sort of originating in the academic community, academic publishing, but clearly there's a broader application here. Where else do you see, the technology being implemented?
Probably. So one of the areas that's near and dear to my heart is research collaborations.
Mm-hmm.
So specifically groups like LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory folks that won the Nobel Prize,
Yep.
or CERN, the folks with that really big Hadron Collider, or even other humanities-based research collaborations like DARIA. Those groups have a really interesting problem, which is they've got researchers from whole sorts of different institutions around the world, and they all need to come to a single place to actually collaborate, either with wikis or emails or data storage or even access to equipment. And those collaborations usually don't have a strong identity and access management team.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to use federated identity. The sweet spot for seamless access is in the getting a user to find their identity provider so that they can actually log in. That's what we enable.
Right.
And that has been such a big problem for the research collaboration world for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to solve for that is pretty important to us.
Can you talk a little bit about what was specifically problematic for them?
There were, in a way, it's the same problems that the publishers had, that there's so many different ways to try and find your identity provider.
Mm-hmm.
Some sites had, took cues from NASCAR and just had lots of different icons, which became overwhelming. Some sites tried to just give you a list of every possible IDP on the planet for you to hunt through and find the one that was right for you. Some groups, I mean, it just varied. The implementation was as chaotic as it could possibly be, and it was a very difficult user experience.
Okay. So Laird, I want to jump over to you real quick. As a publisher, talk a little bit about your angle here. What's this whole thing doing for you?
Yeah, I think the problem that we're trying to solve for our end users, researchers, is that historically the means by which those researchers would gain access to the subscriptions that their institutions would take with publishers was via their institution's IP address. So, I'm a researcher. I'm on a device that's connected to my institution's network. I come to a publisher's site. The publisher sees that I'm on that IP address, and as a result, we authenticate and entitle them to their institutional subscriptions. But the problem that we've been seeing is that that's working less and less well for end users and institutions. So we have end users who, are starting their discovery, authentication, and access journeys on devices that aren't connected to their institutional network. They're coming through the publisher sites and hitting paywalls when they shouldn't, and getting frustrated and giving up, and maybe going to get the content freely online somewhere else, legally or illegally. And the methods that we've historically provided them to prove that they're a member of their institution when they're outside of their institutional IP range can be long and painful and confusing journeys. You look at the federated authentication journey as it existed across many publishers' sites. You had different calls to action to initiate that journey. Heather was talking a little bit there about the different "where are you from" page experiences that people would have to go through. They'd have to go through that experience over and over again on each publisher's site as they were going through their journeys to access content on publisher sites. And from an institution's perspective as well, we've found some institutions no longer have static IP addresses that they can give us. They're instituting security software like Zscaler, which means that they have a shared IP and not a unique IP that we see them coming from. And so, there are some solutions out there like proxies, for example.
Right.
But even then, those proxies can be painful experiences for users. We've seen user experiences where they find a piece of content, they hit the paywall, they go back to their library discovery service. They research for the piece of content there. They authenticate there. They research. They search again for the piece of content. They click through again, and so even those are not, or in some cases not working particularly well for end users. And so what the seamless access the seamless access experience offered to us was a way to ease that sort of off-network authentication and access for our end users. So it was a new experience of federated access that offered a consistent experience across publishers' sites, and an experience that would persist your institutional selection, so that you could get, once you'd gone through the experience of authenticating once, you could get one-click authentication and access as you move to other publishers' sites, and that's very appealing and a problem that we'd like to solve for end users.
Yep. So then, what is that first step, that first authentication process like? What would an end user typically do that first time?
So it's still the federated authentication experience, for the most part, that and love or don't love very much. So I think what will hopefully be improved for the end user is that there will be a consistent call to action across publisher sites. So instead of having to search across publisher sites for, whether it's the shibboleth link or the Athens link or the access through your institution link, or however whatever publisher might want to term it. The part of the recommendations that came out of RI21 and that are being implemented, making use of the seamless access services, are a consistent call to action for users.
Okay.
They still in that sort of cold state, as we term it. They still have to go through the process of selecting institution and putting in their credentials with their institutional identity provider to prove that they're an active member of the institution. But once they've gone through that once, their institutional selection is stored in their local browser storage. And if they go to another publisher site that has implemented seamlessaccess.org, their selection can be surfaced, and they can, just one click to authenticate and access. In the background for the user, that check from the publisher site to the institution is still being made to make sure they're an active member. And in some cases, that their session with their institutional identity provider might have expired, and so they've got to put their credentials back in again. But again, it's much easier for users to find the way to initiate that experience. And once they've gone through it once, if this is widely rolled out across publisher sites, hopefully it's easier as they come back to publisher sites and go to other publisher sites.
Okay. Heather, I just want to jump back over to you. Laird kind of talked about some consistency among publishing partners in terms of how they're implementing this. Do you see that from your perspective working out okay? Are they, generally in consensus, going forward on the way they're providing that access from your perspective?
Generally, we've found two things that we didn't expect, which is again part of why we're doing a beta as we roll this out. One is, and I think we should have seen this one coming, that the publishers in particular have a very strong stake in the look and feel of their website, and so they want to make sure that the button matches their site a bit more than we originally anticipated. We want, from our perspective, we want that button to be common and consistent regardless of where you go. But if your website theme is primarily, orange, and you suddenly got this glaring blue button, it's not something the publishers are particularly happy with. So learning how to work with that and having discussions about what that means.
So a little bit of a branding conflict, it sounds like there.
Yes, that's been fun. And the other thing that we've learned, and this one was a bit more exciting for me personally, because it was a concept that we can do something about more easily, was what if the user is from an identity provider, the publisher is part of the seamless access universe, but the publisher knows that particular identity provider doesn't have access on their site. Well, what do you present to the user then? Do you want them to click on the button that good and well isn't going to work? or do you actually change what the button looks like in response? And that was some really good feedback for us to hear and for us to make some changes for.
And what did you come up with for that?
We're trying to figure out how to technically implement a sort of a third state of, so we've got the cold state of, we have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
We've got we'll call it the hot state of, we know who you are and you have access. And now we're going to have this weird gray state of, we know your IDP, but they don't have access, and figure out how to implement that.
Is that an instance where the publisher might want some kind of call to action?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes. But
Okay.
what that call to action might be needs to be flexible for the different publishers, because they might very well do different things.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing we really want to do is tell publishers what their business model ought to be. That's so outside of our scope.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, just going back to sort of the idea of the access button is one color and the publisher has their own design concerns for their site. Was that a situation where Seamless Access, the organization, basically wanted to create some sort of identifiable access branding that end users would sort of become familiar with?
Well, yeah, in a way that was sort of the point, right?
Okay,
To have something that the users would recognize from one site to the next
Mm-hmm.
in the same way that if you're using social media, stepping outside of academia for the moment and going into the regular commercial world, how familiar is Google's button?
Yeah, right.
Or Facebook's button? And yet it doesn't matter what the site looks like. That's the button, and you know exactly what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's a good point, because I think for me personally, up to this point, I've been thinking about this in terms of just making it as maybe even invisible or frictionless, but in fact, it's there's a point to making it identifiable and recognizable then. You just heard from Heather Flanagan, Program Director at seamlessaccess.org, and Laird Barrett, Digital Product Manager at Springer Nature. Join us next week when we continue our conversation and talk about the development, goals, and implementation of the Seamless Access service.
But there's still, there's the fact is that even with that, there's still pain in that experience for users. And so the question is, well, what's the next step? What's the next piece of pain that you can suck out for researchers, so that we're getting to a place where it is again, seamless and easy for users to find the content they want and get through to the content they want in a sort of legitimate and legal way.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's digital media specialist, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.